That crushing exhaustion you feel every morning at 40 is not a medical condition. It is not a flaw in your character, nor a sign that you are failing at life. Carl Jung called it the inevitable collapse of the false self. You have spent half your life building a fortress of success to protect your peace. But you unknowingly locked the ultimate enemy inside with you. The inner citadel. Today, we explore the illusion of peace. We will combine the ancient discipline of Stoicism with Carl Jung's profound shadow work. You are currently in what psychologists call the rush hour of life. Caught between raising children, caring for aging parents, and maintaining a career that increasingly feels devoid of meaning. You play the role of the provider, the reliable partner, the unshakable professional. Yet beneath this immaculate social mask, what Jung called the persona, a quiet rebellion is brewing. You may find yourself staring at your phone for hours, paralyzed by an invisible weight. Or perhaps you erupt in disproportionate anger at the people you love the most over trivial inconveniences. This is not simply modern burnout. It is a crisis of the soul. Recent empirical data proves that the root of our misery is not what happens to us, but how our minds process it. To understand this, we must look at how our mind traps us. A 2021 study published in Cognitive Therapy and Research revealed a fascinating truth. Individuals who underwent rigorous Stoic philosophical training experienced up to an 18% reduction in rumination. Furthermore, the 2026 Stoic Week data, tracking over 3,000 global participants, confirmed this. It demonstrated a massive 15% increase in self-efficacy and a severe drop in negative thinking. Why do ancient philosophies and Jungian archetypes possess such profound healing power for the modern brain? Because they directly attack the fundamental error of the midlife mind, the illusion of control. Epictetus, a slave who became one of history's greatest philosophers, taught the dichotomy of control. Some things are within our power and others are not. It is a brutally simple premise. Yet by the time we reach 40, we have inverted this fundamental law of nature. We expend monumental amounts of psychological energy trying to control the uncontrollable. We try to control the opinions of our colleagues, the aging of our bodies, and the unpredictable nature of our children. Meanwhile, we completely abandon control over the one domain that is entirely ours. Our own internal judgments, our reactions, and the dark corners of our unconscious mind. As Seneca wisely observed 2 millennia ago, we suffer more often in imagination than in reality. Our imagination, specifically the dark, unseen theater of our unconscious mind, is where the true war of midlife is fought. Carl Jung warned that everything we deny in ourselves, our anger, our selfishness, our raw desires, does not simply evaporate. We shove these unacceptable traits into a psychological basement, meticulously locking away what he called the shadow. For 20 or 30 years, you have been the master architect of your own persona. You built a pristine mask of the good person. You became the reliable employee, the sacrificial parent, the spouse who absorbs every blow without a single complaint. But maintaining this immaculate facade requires an absolutely exhausting, relentless amount of psychological energy. By the time you reach your mid-40s, the toll of this constant, silent suppression reaches a critical, explosive mass. The shadow begins to leak. It manifests as a sudden, inexplicable urge to burn your entire, carefully curated life down. Or worse, it appears as a paralyzing numbness, a profound, terrifying disconnection from the very life you worked so hard to build. You might find yourself pouring that third glass of wine in silence, or endlessly scrolling through screens to silence your thoughts. These are not mere bad habits or character flaws. They are desperate escape hatches constructed by a suffocating soul. Modern neuroscience perfectly supports Jung's theory. When we chronically suppress our true emotions, our brain's fear center remains hyperactive. We become trapped in a state of low-grade, perpetual fight or flight. We are fighting a silent, internal war of attrition against ourselves. Here is where the ancient Stoics offer a devastatingly effective weapon: the practice of detached, objective observation. Marcus Aurelius, a Roman emperor who wielded absolute power, wrote his famous Meditations not to lecture the public, but to heal his own soul. He repeatedly commanded himself to strip away the dramatic narratives and terrifying stories he attached to his raw feelings. When you feel that sudden surge of midlife rage or despair, your conditioned instinct is to immediately suppress it or destructively act upon it. The Stoic, however, takes a breath and steps back. They observe the emotion simply as a natural, weather pattern passing through the landscape of the mind. They ruthlessly apply the dichotomy of control. I cannot control that this dark thought has arisen, but I retain absolute control over my judgment of it. Jung would agree, noting that this is the crucial first step of shadow work. You must look at the monster hiding in the dark without flinching. Because once you truly look, you realize a profound truth. The shadow is not inherently evil. It is merely unintegrated, raw power. The aggressive anger you suppress at work might be the exact assertiveness your soul desperately needs to set healthy boundaries. The selfishness you loathe in yourself could actually be a distorted, muted cry for desperately needed self-care. To endlessly strive to be a good person at the expense of your own wholeness is the greatest tragedy of adulthood. Jung famously and boldly stated, "I would rather be whole than good." This is a terrifying, paradigm-shifting concept for the midlife mind. Because becoming whole requires you to finally invite the stranger you have been running from to sit at your table. If you refuse this invitation, the unconscious will not simply remain quiet. It will forcefully take matters into its own hands. It will begin to aggressively project your hidden, suppressed darkness onto the innocent people around you. That intense, irrational hatred you feel toward a specific coworker, or the sudden disgust toward your spouse. It is rarely about them. It is almost always a direct reflection of the exact trait you refuse to acknowledge within yourself. Seneca warned us 2,000 years ago with chilling accuracy. We suffer more often in imagination than in reality. Modern neuroscience has finally caught up to this ancient truth, mapping this exact phenomenon within the brain's default mode network. Your mind literally cannot distinguish the chemical difference between a real physical threat and a completely imagined psychological scenario. This is why you wake up at 3 a.m. with a racing heart and clenched jaw, desperately fighting phantoms that do not exist. The Stoics deeply understood that the imagination is the ultimate, bloodiest battlefield of the midlife transition. To win this war, you must stop blindly engaging with the terrifying projections and start observing the projector itself. Carl Jung called this fundamental psychological defense mechanism projection. It is the unconscious, desperate act of taking our own unacceptable traits and aggressively pasting them onto the faces of others. When a 45-year-old manager screams at a junior employee for a minor, insignificant mistake, he is rarely angry at the mistake itself. He is violently rejecting his own deeply buried, paralyzing fear of incompetence. By projecting the shadow outward, you temporarily protect the immaculate, fragile image of your social persona. But the ultimate cost of this psychological defense mechanism is a state of total, devastating isolation. You end up living in a terrifying world, populated entirely by enemies of your own making. But what happens when you finally stop projecting, when you bravely pull the mirror back onto yourself? The moment you withdraw your projections, the real, grueling work of midlife begins. Jung called it the alchemical work. Here, Stoicism provides the vital emotional shock absorbers required to survive this devastating internal realization. Because coming face to face with your own hidden shadow will initially feel like a profound, sickening moral defeat. You will suddenly see the vanity, the cowardice, and the subtle, manipulative tactics you have seamlessly used for decades. But the Stoic framework gently reminds you, this darkness is not who I am, it is merely raw material. You do not need to identify with the shadow. You only need to courageously integrate its trapped energy. Think of the shadow as a wild, untamed stallion within the landscape of your psyche. For 20 years, you have kept it heavily chained in a dark barn, terrified of its destructive, raw power. Now at midlife, the wood is rotting and the beast is relentlessly kicking down the doors. You can either let it escape and trample your marriage and career, or you can finally learn to ride it. Integrating the shadow gives you immediate access to a massive reservoir of trapped, vital life force. This profound psychological awakening is the exact phenomenon that modern researchers call the Stoic zest. When you finally stop spending all of your precious energy suppressing yourself, life suddenly floods back in. But this radical transition is rarely smooth. It requires the necessary, painful death of the old, false self. Consider the tragic reality of so many who reach the supposed pinnacle of their lives, only to find ashes. I once knew a man who spent his entire adult life building the perfect, unassailable fortress. He had the perfect career, the immaculate house, and the reputation of a man who never once stumbled. Yet every night, after the house went completely silent, he would sit alone in the dark and quietly weep. He had built an impenetrable fortress of success to protect his peace and keep the chaotic world out. But he had unknowingly locked his own unacknowledged, suffocating shadow inside the walls with him. This is the terrible, invisible price of avoiding the inner work during your middle years. As Jung profoundly warned, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Your midlife exhaustion is not a punishment. It is your soul's most desperate, final attempt to make you whole. It is the piercing alarm bell, ringing loudly from deep within the burning house of your false self. The Stoic response is not to panic and try to put out the fire, but to calmly walk through it. To stand firmly in the ashes of the person you thought you were, and finally see what indestructible core remains. This requires an immense, almost superhuman courage, the courage to admit that you are not entirely good. You are infinitely complex. You are a vast, unexplored continent of both profound light and terrifying darkness. When you finally begin to accept this shadow, a profound psychological alchemy takes place within your mind. The heavy, exhausting, suffocating armor of the social persona finally cracks and falls away from your soul. You completely stop expending all of your vital life force, pretending to be a flawless, perfect entity. And in that sudden, terrifying vulnerability, true, unshakable peace is finally born. A profound peace that does not depend on everything in your external world going exactly right. A Stoic tranquility that exists even in the very midst of the chaos, loss, and unpredictability of your later years. Because you are no longer at war with yourself, the internal civil war has finally ended. You have courageously descended into the dark and reclaimed the lost, fragmented pieces of your own soul. You have taken the agonizing, yet beautiful first step on what Jung called the path of individuation. The ancient philosophers understood this harrowing journey. They called it the path to the inner citadel. It is a fortress not built of stone or social status to forcefully keep the world out, but an indestructible fortress of self-knowledge that no external storm, betrayal, or failure can ever breach. Today, we have illuminated the heavy mask you wear and the devastating shadow it casts upon your life. You have taken the crucial, terrifying first step of looking directly into the dark without turning away. May you find the profound courage to sit quietly with your shadow tonight and finally listen to what it has to say. But recognizing the mask is merely opening the front door to the vast, uncharted labyrinth of the unconscious. What happens when you step fully inside and encounter the immense, ancient archetypes waiting in the deepest layers of your mind? In the next part of our journey, we will descend further to uncover the terrifying, yet liberating, forces that truly govern your fate.